All right, newly released concussion research shows something different than we've previously learned, that physical activity is beneficial for kids who have recently suffered a concussion. Now, getting physical exercise within a week of suffering a concussion may actually reduce a young person's risk of experiencing ongoing symptoms. So this is, of course, against what we have been told are the traditional ways of treatment. What else has changed in concussion research? Well, we were wondering. So joining us today on Your Morning is Dr. Kristian Goulet. She's the medical director of the concussion clinic at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. And Aurora, who is currently recovering from a concussion that she received last fall. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so Doctor, the genesis of our conversation today is that my son recently suffered a concussion, and this is how I learned about this new research. Tell us, I explained a little bit about the physical differences, but tell us how we came to this change.
Well, we've known that physical exercise is good for human beings for centuries, and so it kind of went against traditional thought when he said, all right, well, someone has an injury, to really shut them down, because we know the lack of exercise actually is detrimental to the brain. And so traditionally what we thought is kids can't be active when they have a concussion, because that puts them at risk of getting hit again. So this new literature that comes out basically says that, yeah, exercise is good, potentially good for concussion brains. Now, the only problem is, though, is that kids, when they do start becoming physically active, they can't do anything that does put themselves at risk of getting hit to the head. And I think that's where the initial recommendations came out is, well, you can't be physically active, because we are afraid that if kids, when they do get hit, that they have this second impact syndrome.
Yeah, and I remember as a parent being told, when I had a concussion, that it was almost like a bruise, that if you exercise, you'd make the bruise bigger. If you stay still and rest your brain, then the bruise eventually will shrink. Julia, you've been a concussion patient or an ongoing concussion patient. What happened to you? First of all, tell us your story and then how you're doing now.
So I sustained my concussion on November 19th of 2016 while playing a game of hockey. I got a blindside hit to the head, and immediately I felt dizzy and not myself. So I went right to the bench, and my trainer pulled me from the game. 2 days later, I went to my family doctor, and she diagnosed me with a concussion. So we checked up with her every week, but we weren't seeing the information and progress we wanted. So we asked for a referral to Dr. Goulet.
All right, and then what are some of the challenges that you face, and how are you doing now?
I'm doing much better. Dr. Goulet was a huge help for me. He provided me with the information and resources I needed to get better. So I was taking supplements like omega-3 and magnesium glycinate. He was adamant on yoga and staying active every day. The biggest thing I learned from Dr. Goulet is to get myself out of the red and orange phase of stress and get myself back to the green phase. I did this by the yoga and meditation, but the biggest thing I kept telling myself was that not to put pressure on myself to get back on the ice, telling myself that I wasn't letting my teammates down, and to stop stressing as much with schoolwork. And after I did that, I ended up being cleared to play non-contact hockey.
All right, so Dr. Goulet, then let me check in with you. If you're a parent and you've got a child who you believe has a concussion and you show up at the ER, what are the steps then that we should take?
Well, the first few steps are rest. When you do get a hit to the head, it's a chemical imbalance in your brain. And for the first 24 to 48 hours, your brain does really need to rest. But outside of that, initial phase, you have to start pushing forward. I always tell people that concussions are not just a brain injury, but it's a full body injury, and you have to treat the whole body. And when we start taking young kids and we start making them feel sick by putting them in a dark room, locking the door, and sliding food under the door, it doesn't really do much for their holistic health. And so what we have to do is get them moving, get the blood flowing, get them outside, don't socially isolate them, get them physically moving in a very safe, gradual return to play guidelines, and get them back to school as quickly but as safely as possible as well.
All right, what about the mental exhaustion of heading back to school? Aside from the physical work, being at school, there's lights, there's, a lot of noise with other kids around, plus you're trying to learn new things.
So absolutely. So there's new studies coming out saying that the longer we pull kids out of school, we actually don't improve concussion outcomes. And so what we do is we try to get kids back to school within the first week or two, even if they're having symptoms. But as I say, we get them there in body and not in mind. So you don't want to socially isolate kids. So you get them to school, but they're not doing tests, they're not doing quizzes, they're not taking notes. They're taking frequent breaks, staying well hydrated. And when they do start to develop some symptoms, they're allowed to take these long breaks. But we know that social isolation and deconditioning, both physically, mentally, is not the way that we should be treating the vast majority of concussions.
This is fascinating new research for so many of us as parents who, sort of are still, learning about the old way of treating concussions. Thanks so much for being on Your Morning, both Dr. Goulet and Julia.
Thank you.